Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. It's V, the Guerrilla Economist, and I have with me the man that needs no introduction at this point. It is the one and only Harley Schlanger. Harley's going to break down the geopolitical, geoeconomic, and the geostrategic, especially hot on the heels of what has happened right now with General Flynn. That he has been exonerated, pretty much. They dropped all the charges, and he is a free man, as well as the huge news out from Germany. Folks, I'm telling you right now, the globalism is dying a death of 1,000 cuts. So without further ado, Harley, how are you, sir?
I'm doing pretty well, V. It's one of the few times you can say there are some good rulings coming from courts.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, where do you want to begin, man? Go for
let's
it.
start with the Flynn case, because
Sure.
this has been evolving ever since Sidney Powell took over from the establishment law firm that he initially had, Covington and Burling, which is Eric Holder's law firm. That's who was representing Flynn when they were making deals with the prosecution to get Flynn to plead guilty.
Right.
Now, once Powell started digging, it became clear that there were, to be polite, you could say shenanigans, but to be accurate, you could say corrupt, fraudulent proceedings coming from the Justice Department. And this has come out in a few different leaks over the last couple of weeks. The documents relating to the interrogation of Flynn, even before that, the fact that in January 4th, 2017, the FBI had decided to drop the case, and Peter Strzok, according to these new documents that were disclosed, Peter Strzok, the corrupt FBI agent, insisted that the case be reinstated and got Comey to agree to have a interrogation of Flynn on January 24th, 2017, where they were reading from a transcript that Flynn didn't know they had. They didn't tell him they had it. They didn't tell him he could have an attorney. They didn't tell him he was a target. And after they left the meeting, their initial response, and this is Peter Strzok and another FBI agent, their initial response was that Flynn didn't lie. But then the original 302, which was the document from the interrogation, disappeared. Strzok and Lisa Page, his mistress, wrote up a new 302, and Flynn was then brought in under Mueller, where he was given the typical prosecutor's Torquemada torture. Long sessions, threats against his family, bankrupting him, forcing him to sell his house, and getting a plea deal with him. Now, what happened is once Sidney Powell took over and she started digging, these documents came out and showed that, as Bill Priestap, one of the top FBI operatives on this case, said, do we want to get a confession from him or do we want him to lie? And that's how they went into that meeting. And as Comey said, this wouldn't have taken place with another administration. He wouldn't have done this with another administration. So with all of this coming out, the Justice Department passed these documents. Actually, these documents were reviewed by Jensen, who's a U.S. attorney in St. Louis, Missouri Eastern Court. And as they came out, there was a ruling that this case had to be dropped. And this is causing huge blowback, just like the decision to reduce the Roger Stone sentence causes blowback. The old networks of the DOJ are going crazy.
Right.
But what happened was the government ruled that the interrogation of Flynn was unjustified by the counterintelligence investigation into Mr. Flynn. In other words, there was not enough evidence to do the kind of investigation or interrogation that would lead to an indictment. Now, the prosecutors are saying, well, if that were the case, we'd never be able to prosecute anyone. If we had to wait until we had evidence, we couldn't do it. Well, maybe that's a good thing, because right now, as the joke goes, they could indict a ham sandwich. So
exactly.
This now along with this comes the release yesterday of what's called the scope document, the document that Rod Rosenstein drew up that was the mandate that was used by Mueller in his investigation.
Right.
And Now, think of the timing on this. August 2017, Rosenstein draws this up. And it basically includes all the points from the Christopher Steele memo. Now, in January 2017, 7.5 months earlier, the FBI and the Justice Department concluded that the Christopher Steele report was bunk, was completely fake, had no reliable evidence. So, how could he then use it as a blueprint for Mueller's investigation? So, as we're seeing the drip, drip, drip of the prosecutorial fraud coming forward, it becomes clear that this was nothing but a coup attempt run by corrupt networks in the FBI, the CIA, in collaboration with intelligence networks in the so-called Five Eyes, Britain, Australia, and others. And what it really means is there's got to be, I think, two immediate steps. One is the reversal of the decisions against Roger Stone and Paul Manafort, because Flynn, Stone, and Manafort were the three key guys that Mueller went after. Manafort and Flynn, because they knew the whole story of Russia, that Trump wanted to work with Russia. They knew the fraud of the so-called anti-terror campaign under Obama, which was really a pro-terror campaign. They had to be removed before Trump was given the keys to expose all the corruption in the deep state. And Roger Stone was the architect of the successful campaign. So Stone's verdict should be overturned, Manafort should be overturned, or they should both be pardoned by Trump. But I think this is a profound victory for those people, including the president, who said this was nothing but a fraudulent witch hunt from the beginning.
Now that this has come out, and Comey is pretty much at this point a dead man walking, how far has this gotten to the point now, Harley, where the elephant in the room that nobody's mentioning, the elephant in the room,
Barack Obama.
exactly. What did he know and what was his involvement is now the question. There's no way that even in the Steele dossier, when he's talking about, I had direct communication with the National Security Advisor, Suzanne Rice. There's no way this does not roll back on Obama in a major way, Harley.
Well, Lisa Page, in one of her text messages to her lover, Peter Strzok, said the POTUS needs to be briefed because he wants to be kept abreast of everything. So someone's got to bring Lisa Page in and say, what exactly did you mean by this? And maybe they should give her one of these 24-hour interrogations that her boyfriend, Peter Strzok, is accustomed to doing. So, these things are going to come out. Now, the question remains, will there be prosecution coming from the John Durham investigation? I think as these things are breaking, it's inevitable that the next step will be prosecution. And if it doesn't happen, there should be an incredible outcry from the American people, because we had the first 3 years of the Trump presidency stolen because of this corruption. The vote in the 2016 election was, in a sense, nullified by the operation to keep Trump from doing what he wanted to do, which was to work with Putin and Xi toward peace in the Middle East, peace in North Korea, and additionally working with prosecutors to get to the bottom of what happened in 2008 that built up the bubble that we're now seeing crash today.
Absolutely. And on top of that, if my God, if Comey doesn't get indicted, which, I mean, if he's in, if he, my God, Harley, if he gets indicted, he gets prosecuted. I mean, what's the penalty for treason? It's
Well,
death.
here's an interesting question. If I were Barack Obama, I would be worried that maybe McCabe will spill the beans, maybe Peter Strzok, maybe Lisa Page, maybe Priestap. There are about 5 or 6 people, including Comey. Comey, I don't think is above. I don't think Comey's going to take one in the back for Obama. So you have a number of these people who could turn. We know that lower level FBI operatives already have turned. That's what Joe DeGeneva has been reporting. So if I were Barack Obama, I would probably be going through some sleepless nights right now.
Absolutely right. I mean, he not only. I mean, the question at this point, this is so egregious. This is so massive. The question at this point, will we start seeing mysterious suicides in the next couple of days, Harley?
You know, one of the things that's good is that so much of this has been out in the open that the suicides wouldn't be mysterious. You know,
Yeah.
shots in the back of the head with a shotgun would not have been labeled a suicide this time around.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, B, let me get to this German constitutional court question.
Yeah, this is huge too.
Really devastating to the European Union. And you can just see the panic developing. You know, the European Central Bank and the European Council came up with a new bailout mechanism called the European Stability Mechanism, the ESM. And this
Yes.
is essentially a kind of bailout operation very similar to what the Federal Reserve is doing in the United States, creating huge volumes of worthless paper out of thin air, which are then being transferred through the central bank to the banks and the shadow banking system to back up the worthless assets being held by these institutions by allowing them to sell them to either the Fed in the United States or the European Central Bank in Europe. Now, what this means is that essentially in Europe, where you don't really have a federal system, I mean, first of all, in the United States, the Federal Reserve is not a government agency, it's not a public agency, it's a private bank that's run on behalf of the private banks. So it's fairly clear in the US that we're dealing with an unconstitutional fraud. But in Europe, up to this point, the argument has been the European Central Bank and the European Council can override objections from nations based on the charter, the European Charter. Now, in this case, what happened is a case was brought to the German Constitutional Court about the bailout that's underway. And what the Constitutional Court did shocked everyone because what they ruled is that the so-called public sector purchase program, which is very much like the BlackRock special purpose vehicle in the United States, was implemented in disregard of its economic and social effects. In other words, if the EU is supposed to be operating on behalf of the people of the various European countries, and yet it's creating mountains of new paper and debt, threatening to devalue the euro on behalf of the banks as opposed to social and economic consequences for the people. It's violating the agreement between the nation states that joined the European Union. So, what the Constitutional Court ruled is that this is nothing but a bank bailout operation in which you're transferring large quantities of high risk government bonds to the balance sheet of the euro system. This would not improve the economic situation for the people, only of the relevant banks. And then
Right.
they went on to specify that the inflationary impact of this would be a loss for private savings. Secondly, it would allow economically unviable companies to continue in business at the expense of the people. And their final ruling, was that unless changes are made, the Bundesbank, which is the German national bank, may no longer participate in the implementation and execution of the European Central Bank decisions and must sell the bonds already purchased. Now, if that were to go into effect today, the European Union would have collapsed because the Bundesbank, the German bank, is the buyer of last resort. They've been buying up, scooping up all the bad debt for the last 20 years. That's why Germany is hated by Greece and by Italy and Spain, because German banks are the ones dictating the austerity policies through the European Union. But if now the Bundesbank is being told they cannot buy these bonds from the European Central Bank, then where's the money going to come from for the bailouts? And what's that mean for the banks that are in the European Union? And so as a result, you had a number of people correctly saying this is a ruling that puts national sovereignty ahead of the European Union. more profound even than Brexit, because this means that there's a rebellion against the takeaway of sovereignty of independent nations. Now, the fact that the German Constitutional Court spelled out that what the bailouts represent is a violation of the German Basic Law, which was the constitutional provisions that came about in 47 and 48, 1947 and 48, means that the whole history of Germany after World War II is thrown into question by its involvement in the European Union. And so you had Giulio Tremonti, the former Italian economics minister, who said, this is a huge victory for the nation states of Europe. You had Salvini, the head of the Lega Nord, the Lega party, which is the biggest party in Italy right now, say that this is a blow on behalf of sovereignty against the corporate federalism of the bankrupt European Union. You had the Financial Times saying in a very somewhat understated way, what does this mean for the EU? We may not know for the next 3 months. And now what they're counting on is that the cowards in the Bundestag, that is the German parliament, will make some kind of ruling that says, well, this isn't binding. But if they do that, that would probably be overridden by the Constitutional Court. Now, the final point I want to make on this is why this is so significant, is that up to this point, there have been at least 6 challenges to the various European Union rules on bailouts and the Euro system. Six cases that were made before the Constitutional Court, where the Constitutional Court ruled on behalf of the European Union, saying this is higher law than the German Basic Law. This time, they said German Basic Law must prevail. And the Chief Justice of the German Constitutional Court, this was his last ruling, and there's speculation that he decided he was going to go out with a bang. So this throws into question whether the Eurozone will continue to exist. Now, there's still ways around it. It's not a done deal, but this will probably reinvigorate the nationalist forces in Italy, in France, in Austria, and probably in Germany as well. And I talked to some people today in Germany, some very prominent figures, a couple of whom were somewhat flummoxed. They said, this came out of the blue. I don't know what to make of it. But one of them said, maybe if we do this in Germany, you Americans will get your act together and take on the corruption of the Federal Reserve System. So I think this is one of these shots that can be heard around the world.
You know, it truly is amazing, Harley, because what we're witnessing, what we're seeing here, that there's a major opportunity. I see some light at the end of the tunnel where not only globalism, but central banking is on the ropes. The bureaucratic systems, the corrupt institutions, they are on the ropes. They're literally at this point pining for relevancy. And their avarice, Harley, is so naked and bare for everyone to see.
And V, it's worse than that. Their survival depends on the cowardice of political institutions and the ignorance of populations that don't know who's doing this to them. Now it's coming out into the open when you have the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, saying, oh, we have a Main Street program that's going to help you out. Here are a few crumbs. And oh, by the way, 4 to 6 trillion will be going to the big banks and the shadow banking system. That makes things a little more clear, even though the media is not covering it. In Germany, today there was somewhat of a muted response overall, but the newspaper in Bild Zeitung in Munich, where you have a fairly strong nationalist type conservative movement in Bavaria, the newspaper said, this will have repercussions for the next 20 years. And I think that's true. So, the question is, the old story, if a tree falls in a forest and no one hears it, does it make a sound? Well, a big tree just came down. We've got to make sure that people know about it and realize that the question of sovereignty is in their hands. If we are a sovereign nation in the United States, the people must make decisions. So with the Flynn case, what we saw is that the president won the fight against a coup attempt by the globalists, the so-called deep state. And now this ruling in Germany shows that even in a land where most people still act as though it's occupied by the Anglo-American post-war military, that even in a land like that, the strength of nationalism still exists. And for people who are scared of nationalism in Germany, forget it. This isn't Hitler. This isn't National Socialism. It's the opposite. The Nazi phenomena is what the European Union is doing by asserting a dictatorship of the banks over the sovereign nation states which gave up their sovereignty. If they claim back their sovereignty, you have a potential for bilateral and multilateral agreements that will benefit the people of these various nations. And so, as someone living in Germany now, I can tell you there will be a slow wake up for the German people. But I think there's going to be a certain reaction, a rumbling that's going to be heard all over the country over the next couple of weeks. And by the way, it's already been heard in London, in Brussels, and in Paris.
Absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. Harley, thank you so much for coming on board and sharing this information with us. Amazing things are happening around the world, folks, and it's truly remarkable. Next week, Harley, something tells me it's going to be a very exciting week in terms of news and information that's going to be pouring out with everything that's happening.
Well, and let me make a suggestion to your listeners. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on the schillerinstitute.com website, there will be a very exciting program on the consequences of the event that will have taken place 75 years ago, which is the end of World War II.
Right.
And the potential at that time to establish a world without British colonies, without imperial powers. Here we are 75 years later. Maybe we can now realize that. And if people want to get more from me, want to hear more about what I have to say on these things, they can always write to me at harleysch@gmail.com. And I'm happy to answer questions, take challenges, debate issues, whatever people want to do. But harleysch@gmail.com.
Fantastic. And thank you, Harley, for again joining with us. And folks, enjoy your weekends. Make sure you subscribe, like, comment, and share this vital information. Thank you.